please the court. Good morning. Abraham Lincoln said that it is much the duty of government to render prompt justice against itself as it is to render the same against the people. What he was saying was, we have a government comprised of prosecutors and police officers whose job it is to render justice against citizens when they violate the law. And that's what we're accustomed to. Prosecutors and police officers working together when someone has violated the law so that they may be held accountable, so that we may have peace and dignity in our state. But Lincoln reminded that no one is above the law, that those in government can also violate the law. And when that happens, it is the government's job to also render justice against those they work with. And so on May 24, 2022, when 19 children were slaughtered and 10 others were injured, Texas Rangers from all over the state came to Uvalde, Texas, investigated the crime scene, talked to witnesses, analyzed the case for up to a year. And after analyzing the case, one of the members of the government has been brought to you for justice. But ultimately, in our country, in a democracy, it is the people that decide their government. You do that by electing officials. You do that by sending letters or requests to have the law changed. And when one of the members of your government violates the law, you decide whether or not that is acceptable. Because make no mistake, the 12 of you will set the bar for law enforcement in these situations. If it's appropriate to stand outside hearing 100 shots while children are being slaughtered, that is your decision to tell the state of Texas. And by the same token, if that is not appropriate, that is not how we expect officers that are charged with the duty of protecting children to act, that will also go out from this courtroom. The judge has told you that your oath was to render a true verdict according to the law and according to the facts. He has given you the law, and it is that same law that we discussed in voir dire some 2 weeks ago. You recall we talked about this is a special statute because we're dealing with a special group of people. We're dealing with children under 15 years of age, and so we're expected to act differently when we're talking about children that are frail, can't defend themselves, 15 years old or younger. And in this law, the law of child endangerment, none of us are allowed to endanger a child. None of us can point a gun at a child, put them in danger, put them in harm's way. But there is also the protection that if you have a duty to act, you can't stand by while the child is in imminent danger. If you have a duty to protect the child, you can't stand by and allow it to happen. We talked about the people that have a duty Parents have a statutory duty, and police officers have a statutory duty. And those two sets of people cannot fail to act when a child is in imminent danger. And so the charge in this case is that these 29 children were in danger. Not just danger, but imminent, immediate, close at hand danger. And that there was a man who had a duty to act, who failed to act. And that failure to act, he was aware or should have been aware that that placed those children in danger. But we're also very specific about it. How is it that he failed to act? He failed to act after being aware that shots are fired, being told the general location of the defendant, of the gunman, having time to respond. He failed to act by either engaging, distracting, delaying, or even attempting to do those things. And also being aware that shots were fired and being advised of the general location of the shooter and having time to act and having been trained in that active shooter training, he failed to follow his training to respond by advancing toward the shooter until after the children in 111 and 112 had been shot. That is the obligation the state has to prove to you beyond a reasonable doubt. Two other quick mentions of the law that the judge has given you that I'm afraid we may not have discussed in detail on voir dire. The first was that the defendant must engage in a voluntary act. The first was on causation. We talked about when you have child endangerment by omission, there can be two people that can be held responsible. The person that is causing the danger and the person that has a duty to prevent that danger failing to act.
Yeah, I'm just going to object to that. Sorry, at this point. There's concurrent causation is on his board. That's not in the charge.
I'm not discussing that. That just now we're through that, Judge, and I just didn't point it off. I didn't say concurrent cause. I talked about what we talked about in the law that.
Okay. All right, I'll overrule the objection. Go ahead. Ladies and gentlemen, I just noticed the clerk brought to my attention, we were working on that charge yesterday. Your date's wrong on that, it's 21. It's January 21, the last page of it. So it says 20, but it's 21. You know that. Go ahead.
The second issue is voluntary. The defendant must engage in a voluntary act. That's as opposed to an involuntary act. An involuntary act, I believe we talked about during jury selection, is, if you stumble and knock somebody over an embankment and they're injured, that wasn't a voluntary act on your part. A gust of wind blows you into somebody. You're not responsible for that kind of conduct. If somebody swerves into oncoming traffic and hurts somebody, that certainly looks like you should be responsible for that conduct. But what if it was the very first time you'd experienced a heart attack and you lost control of the vehicle? That's not a voluntary act, that's an involuntary act. You're not responsible for that. But if you make a decision to seek cover and ask for cover as opposed to going in and stand by while people are being injured and killed, that is the kind of thing that's the voluntary act that is defined in the statute. And finally, on mental states, there were 4. Intentional is not really something to discuss. Nobody believes that Adrian Gonzales meant for this to happen, wanted this to happen. But the other 3 deals with their level of awareness. Knowingly means simply you're aware that by standing by, it's reasonably certain the children will be in danger. but where is reasonably certain. Reckless is one degree lower than that, and that is not that you're reasonably certain the conduct will happen, but reasonably certain that there is a risk, a substantial and unjustifiable risk that the children will be in danger. But there's still an awareness. But in addition to that, there's criminal negligence, in which the law is simply, you should have been aware, based on all those circumstances, that by you failing to act, the child was at risk. So that's the mental state. Not that he intended it, wanted it to happen, but at minimum, he should have been aware that by standing there, hearing 100 shots, he should have been aware that children were in danger by his failure to act. And so then we move into, and beyond the law, into what the state's case was. And it's pretty straightforward. This is not the order we put it in, but this is just the order I drew it up, because training is a big part of who Adrian Gonzales was. And you have the training that he trained others, because that tells you what he knows. And it also tells you a lot about what the state has done before you got here. In that lesson plan that was introduced into evidence, it tells you that amidst active shooting, the state of Texas stepped forward and required active shooter training for school police officers. And that active shooter training includes stop the killing, stop the dying. And it's not terribly complicated. The training is go to the gunman, advance toward the shots. Pretty straightforward. Not complicated, not hard. Go to where the gunfire is. That's what the training is. We brought you evidence that Adrian Gonzales taught the class that said, advance to the gunman, stop the killing, stop the dying. Even if you're the only one there, solo entry, you've got an obligation to go in. Why? Because in our state we have a priority of life. Innocent civilians, their priority of safety is above the police officers. The officer going through this training is aware that the safety of the innocent is above the safety of the police officer. And in Adrian Gonzales' training, he says, the citizens have a right to expect that. And if you're not willing to do it as a first responder, find another career. Adrian Gonzales is teaching his fellow officers, take your job seriously. It's okay to move aside. It's okay if you're not up to that. Let somebody else step in that is up to it. Because as citizens, we have the right to expect that. When we call for help, we have the right to expect somebody that is put on the badge and put on the gun and put protect and serve on the side of their car will do that when we call. Because if they're not willing to do that, where are you? What are you left with when you're in danger? Who do you call? And so Adrian Gonzales, armed with this training, the next thing we spent a considerable amount of time on was the shot count. The casings along the west side, the casings along the hallway, the casings in 111, the casings in 112. And why did we spend all of the time on that? Because it's the state's position that each shot was notice to Adrian Gonzales to advance toward the gunfire. Each shot was important to those 19 children and those 10 survivors. Each shot. But the shot count, also as we did that, and obviously if you have this kind of slaughter, there's going to be blood, and we apologize for that. But the blood also tells you a story of children engaged in this, doing as they were trained. To hide in the dark, remain quiet, and wait for the police. Did the defendant have time to act? We brought you videos, the funeral home videos, as well as the hallway videos, as well as dispatch, to tell you what he was aware of, when he was aware of it, and what was going on as he stood outside the 4th grade wing for 3.5 minutes before he made his first move, before he moved forward. We also brought you the defendant's statement. And the defendant's statement, I think, clears up almost the entire case. That is what he told the Texas Rangers shortly after this happened. If you're worried about whether or not he had notice and whether he had time to act and what his decision making was, listen to these words from Adrian Gonzales. He's over there. He's over there. He's wearing black. I say where? I hear shots going off. Hear sounds coming from behind the building. I get on the radio and say, shots fired at Rob's school, and give the location and where he is. Trying to get from the front of my vehicle to the back of my vehicle. There's only a tree and a building. She tells me he's over there. She's pointing, saying he's over there. He's dressed in black. I say where? She says the teacher's parking lot. I want to say I saw a black car at the end, and then I hear the rounds going off. When Melody Flores says he's over there, the teacher's parking lot, I hear the rounds going off. Some evidence of auditory exclusion. He tells the Rangers, as Melody Flores is telling him where he is, he hears the rounds going off. She goes, he's over there by the teacher's parking lot. Then I hear the sounds going off. I heard 7 or 9 shots while I was inside the building. The coach said parking lot in all black. That's when I heard the rounds start going off. I never saw him. I never went to the school until I got coverage over here. Then I made entry. I heard like 3 or 4 gunfire. When Pargus was the first one I saw, I told him to come to me for cover because he has a bigger unit. But he deterred and went to the other area. I knew there were kids in the class. That's why we didn't fire and hit the kids. I'm responding because they are saying the guy is running to the school. I didn't respond to the accident. That's a PD traffic. I'm going over there because they are saying the guy is going to the school and has a gun. Yeah, that's why I'm going to the school. And so the question is, If it's Melody Flores is telling him where he is, he's in black, when did she tell him that? Do you really suppose that someone who risked her life to go tell the kids to get inside the door, that is that worried about those children, that turns to run, that when the police officer gets there, doesn't immediately say what she told you she said? He's over there, he's in the parking lot. Where? And she points. And then says, we've got to get in there. And isn't that consistent with what human beings do? Look at Gilbert Lamons. When he sees children in danger, just as Melody Flores sees kids in danger, what does he start saying? Get in there, get in there, get in there, get in there, get in there. Repeats it over and over and over again because of the urgency of the children being in danger. And Adrian Gonzales decides to go to the back of his car, call Mariano Pargas because he's got a bigger unit, and says, I'm not going in until I get cover. We proved to you the children were in danger. And I know that was a horrible thing to have to experience. But each one of those children deserves to be revived. And you needed to know that those 60 shots in rooms 111 and 112 before Adrian Gonzales entered, those shots ended those kids' lives. This was over before he went in. A whole lot of blame for a whole lot of officers. This was over while he stood outside. And we anticipated that the defendant would say, I was confused, regardless of what he said in his statement. And so, certainly gunfire can be a confusing thing. But we brought you teachers that experienced that gunfire. And the teachers told you that experiencing that gunfire, they still put their kids first and they followed their training. Kids first, follow the training. Melody Flores did it. Miss Deming in room 104 did it. Miss Ogburn in 102 did it. Miss Robin did it with her children. And Mercedes Salas said, not till I get my kids out. You can talk about confusion, but their priorities were where they needed to be. Children first. And then we talk about the defendant's evidence, or the defendant's case, let me say. We started very early on that Monday, but he didn't have time because it was too far. It was 45 seconds over there. So we brought you evidence that somebody that covered that almost that same distance was able to do it at a jog in about 11 seconds. It was further than that, given 15, 18 seconds, but it certainly wasn't 45 seconds. And then there was the representation. There were no shots fired toward Melody Flores. There's no evidence of that. And so we brought you the evidence of the eight casings on the side of the parking lot, the shot into room 24. Well, those 8 shots were accidental discharge by a man bent on killing kids. He just made an accident, swung his gun around, and fired those shots, not toward Melody Flores, but toward that window. And so we brought you the casings. One picture shows 3 of the casings, but you remember the FBI agent said we had to go back several times, and so there's 2 more markers that are additional. There's 5 casings. There's 5 shots in the glass and 5 shots directly across up into the, not 5, but shots shrapnel up into the ceiling and down into the floor. So where are those 8 casings being fired? If you have those 5 taken care of, as well as in one room 104. Well, we have room 24. And so they tell you, well, that could have come out of room 111. So we brought you evidence that it was circular or almost oblong, saying that's the wrong angle. But more important than that, there's a piece of conduit running up the roof, running up the building. That bullet would have to pass through without leaving a mark. That evidence about Melody doesn't know what she's talking about is so you don't trust Melody Flores. And if you have any hesitancy on Melody Flores, go back to the defendant's statement where he says she told me where he was, what he was wearing, and then I heard the shots. We had a lot of information about slicing a pie and how long that must take. No way you have time. You've got to get over to the side of the building and slice the pie. And you can't do it quick. You have to do it slowly so you don't put yourself in harm's way. There's no evidence Adrian Gonzales got to a point where he could slice the pie. And we had evidence from their expert that said, slice the pie, how about taking a quick peek? You have cover, you have concealment, the gunman can't see you, you just peek around from a safe position. Well, it wasn't really cover. Well, it's not cover from the south side if the gunman's over there. Adrian can see that way. It's not cover from the west side if the gunman's over there. He's not over there, which Adrian can see. But it is cover from the northwest side, where the gunman is firing 16 shots. While Melody Flores is telling me he's over there. Echo. Adrian did tell the Rangers that there was an echo. So from his spot where he's standing, he's got to find out where that shot's coming from. And he can see on the east side it's not coming there. He can see on the south side it's not coming there. He can see on all directions except behind the building where Melody Flores is telling me he is. That's where it's coming. Not only that, but when Coronado runs up and he hears those shots, within 2 seconds, he's saying, shots fired, get in the building. And Adrian Gonzales knows which building to go to. And Paige knows which building to go to. And they go to the building where the shots are fired and have been firing for 3.5 minutes. Well, let's talk about the doors, the responsibility of the doors. The doors would have slowed him up. Yes, the doors would have slowed him up. He had an AR rifle that penetrates glass. The glass is right next to the doors. He could have weakened that glass within a matter of seconds. It would have slowed him up 2 or 3 seconds to go through that door. You look at rooms 111 and 112 and you see the shots there surrounded around the window. May have slowed him up another couple of seconds if the door is locked. But we're not talking about a couple of seconds. We're talking about 3.5 minutes, number one. Number two, the charge of endangering a child means you have to be aware the child is in imminent danger when you fail to act. And that failing to act, failing to lock the doors, did not happen as the gunman was firing the guns. The children weren't in imminent danger, immediate, close at hand danger when those doors weren't locked. Their failure to act at that point was not at the point where the children were in imminent danger, nor is there evidence they have a statutory duty to act. And in this case, let me say, there are adults we can be very disappointed in. There can be police officers we're very disappointed in. I don't know how you feel about everybody, all those people. I'm not proud. This is the case of the state of Texas versus Adrian Gonzales and the facts against him. And is he going to be held accountable for his lack of action? And so we concentrated our case on the facts against Adrian Gonzales. It's radio dispatch's fault because they didn't give significant enough information. They just said, wreck, man with gun, shots fired. They didn't say if he was shooting at the school or not. That's important information we should have known. But their expert got on the stand and said, wreck, man with a gun, what does that say? Not a lot. A man can be with a gun, but not be all that dangerous. But what about shots fired? His testimony was, then it gets real. What does that mean to a police officer, shots fired? Then it gets real. Then on your way over there, you've got time to know I'm facing somebody where there's shots fired. It reduces the confusion by the preparation. Shots fired. This is real. I've been trained. Shots fired at a school. Not the information in the school. Shots fired. Rob Elementary, man with a gun. I've been trained. I may have to go in solo. It was the police administration's fault because they didn't assign a person to each school. I suppose that statement is really, if they had assigned somebody, as long as it wasn't Adrian Gonzales, the outcome would have been different. The defendant's case, then we moved to the other police officers, Page, Hill, Sauceda, Coronado. And I'll ask you to look through your court's charge and find where it says evaluate the conduct of Page, Hill, Sauceda, or Coronado. You're here to decide one case. But we're glad to talk to you about these officers. Page, the funeral home tape alone shows you that he shows up 2.5 to 3 minutes after Adrian Gonzales is there. And that, along with the raw videotape, shows you that he entered the building within 30 seconds. He shows up, there's shots going on, he assesses the situation in 30 seconds. He's acting. He's acting. Not failing to act. Hill, you recall that it's Hill's responsibility because he was called to Old Carrizo Road. He goes to Old Carrizo Road. He arrives there after the gunman is already inside the school. After the 16 shots from outside had already been fired on the other side of the school. The testimony was there was radio chat about setting up a perimeter. So he sets up a perimeter. Because here's what officers do. They get dispatched and they act. And when they get there, they assess a new set of information and they act. And after he sets up the perimeter, then he joins other people. And yes, the testimony was 25 minutes before he goes in. But Ruby Gonzales told you that once those hallways get full, it can become dangerous to overclutter that hallway, so you find other things to do. Well, if there's a perimeter, doesn't that count for Adrian too? If Adrian got the call to set up a perimeter and he goes there, so be it. But then you gather additional information. And that is 16 shots being fired outside, 24 shots being fired in the hallway, 60 shots being fired in classrooms, and a teacher saying, he's over there, you got to get in. And you respond after you get the additional information. Salcedo shows up 30 seconds after the gunman has started shooting. The gunman shooting into the glass, into the classrooms. That's before Salcedo gets there. And halfway up, you know it's when Salcedo gets there because the bag is dropped. And then shots are fired. 6 shots are fired from behind a long row of cars. You're talking about him having an instant in which the gunman we know is hurrying the last part of that trip. We know the gunman is not firing into the building at that point. He's firing somewhere else. They think they're taking shots. If it's behind the vehicles, there's school classrooms with glass windows. If it's to the south and west, there's a man in dark blue or black. Permission to fire. Being careful. And then getting in his car and acting and following his sergeant to the end of the corner where Coronado says, I believe that's Salcedo. Also jogging to find the gunman. He's acting. And Coronado arrived to the sound of, he said he was receiving gunfire. The man at the funeral home is telling me, I think he says 2 or 3 the building. He's the officer that came that is used to these being bailouts, and maybe it's a road rage, and that's what he's used to doing, whereas a school officer is used to protecting the school grounds. And so he's thinking this is a road rage, and the guy's shooting at us because he doesn't want us to get him. So he goes around to cut him off. But in going around to cut him off, he's acting. He's acting to stop the shooter. You may not like his decision. You may not be proud of his decision. But he's acting. This is a failure to act case. And you know that he's acting because he jogs. He's looking for the gunman. And when he hears shots fired, he acts within 2 seconds. Get in the building, shots fired, and he goes in. He acts. And then the defense brought you evidence of the challenges that Adrian was facing. We start with tunnel vision. That's the whole issue about whether or not Adrian Gonzales saw the gunman in the parking lot. We have no trouble with with the concept that he had tunnel vision and focused on the lady in peach. This charge does not start with Adrian Gonzales arriving at Robb Elementary. The charge starts specifically with, after hearing shots fired, after Melody Flores, witness number one, which you can conclude now is Melody Flores, told him the general location of the shooter, and then having time to act. That's when the case starts. So he has tunnel vision. Okay. Auditory exclusion. Perhaps he didn't hear the shots. Then why would you tell the Rangers when Melody Flores told me where he was, I heard the shots? How does that happen? This was really complicated. Complicated set of facts I have to decide on. Complication, the training is you hear shots, you go to the gunfire. He heard shots and Melody Flores was pointing where to go to the gunfire. There's nothing complicated about that. He's wearing black. He's over in the teacher's parking lot. Go to the gunfire. Perimeter. Why doesn't Adrian get to set up a perimeter if Hill gets to? Why didn't Adrian tell the Rangers? I heard I was supposed to set up a perimeter. That's why I set up a perimeter. That isn't what he said. He said, I waited for cover before I was going in. And finally, this is an issue of stress. And this is my closing remark. I'm sure you're tired of listening to me. That was a dark day. For 29 families, it was extremely dark, and they still wait justice. And I can't let that darkness. But I can say this, there were some bright spots. In that stress, teachers put their kids first. In that stress, kids made ways to try to defend each other. In that stress, kids comforted teachers. In that stress, kids came first. Adrian Gonzales had a duty to put the kids first. And he called